Cool. So let's go ahead and start. Shane, welcome. Thanks for coming over. You asked, how'd you get started in the board game hobby? Well, uh, the the long ago option is that I loved to play board games when I was a kid, but realistically, like modern board gaming, I got into it in 2008, January like 10th ish of 2008, to be really ridiculously explicit, because I got invited to go to a random house party with a coworker. And I went to that, and I knew nobody but my coworker, and I started to chat with a couple people. And at one point, somebody mentioned that they play Settlers of Catan a bunch, and I was like, "Hey, I've heard of that game. Like all through college, I remember hearing people talk about it, but I never had the option to play it." And I mentioned like interest. I was like, "Oh, that's something I've always wanted to try." Hadn't really played board games in like 20 years at that point. And and they said, "Oh well, we're gonna play tomorrow or something like that. So why don't you join us?" So I did, and then I proceeded to play Settlers of Catan like 2 times a week for the next year and a half or something with them. So a lot of people have Settlers of Catan being the game that brought them into the hobby, and for me, that was absolutely the case. I think it was like 8 or 9 months into that I discovered Board Game Geek, actually, because I was curious if there was more Settlers of Catan content out there, and so I searched to see if there was an expansion. Sure enough, there was, and Board Game Geek is the thing that popped up, and I was like, "What is this website?" And also, this Cities and Nights expansion looks incredibly cool. So I ended up I I bought the expansion for Cities and Nights and gave it to my friend because I didn't own Settlers of Catan. It was my friend who owned it. It wasn't his birthday or anything. I was just like, "Here, I paid a bunch of money for this thing. I want to play it, but I don't have the base game." So I gave it to him, and then we proceeded to play that for like another 8 months straight. Somewhere in the middle of that, now that I knew Board Game Geek existed, I found out about a game called Stone Age, and so I bought that. And then suddenly we had two games that we had in rotation. We were playing Settlers of Catan and Stone Age a bunch, and then it just kind of grew from there. But that was definitely the kernel. And I think it was maybe 2 years or so into me being really into this stuff that I looked around to see if I could find a meetup group, like to play with other people, because I was just so interested in all this stuff, and I found the Berkeley Board Gamers here in Berkeley, California. Although I lived in Napa at the time, and if you don't know much about California, that's like an hour and 10 minute drive. And so I started driving down to Berkeley an hour and 10 minutes to play games over here a couple times a week, and then I mean, at that point, I was completely in, like, head over heels. Like I was learning like 5 to 6 games every single game night I showed up to because I knew no games, and I was just like, I will learn anything. And so, yeah, that's how I got into the hobby. Let's see who is next. Soulflame, you said, can you tell a bit about the background of the channel, why the logo, and why the name John Gets Games? Yes, I can definitely do that. In order, I guess I can start with the light bulb logo. Um, let's see. My wife and I worked on trying to come up with a decent logo for at least a year, and I actually have this incredibly. I'm very lucky. I have a coworker whose girlfriend is a professional graphical artist. Like she's very very good, and she's incredibly nice. And this coworker of mine, like I've been working with him for, I guess at that point, about 6 or 7 years. And I mentioned offhand to him that we had been struggling trying to come up with a logo, and neither Jessica or I are artists. And he was like, "Oh, my girlfriend, she could probably help you out." So he gave me her email address. I emailed her, and we ended up taking like 10 months or something like that to finalize this logo. And I just felt so incredibly guilty, actually. I was working with this like professional graphics artist who was really good, and just like dragging it on as I didn't know this and I didn't know that. And she kept giving me all these different options. And the actual light bulb was Jessica, my wife's idea. And with the hexagonal light bulb, the idea was to try and we're trying to bring in the like gets for John Gets Games as the like understands, but also acquires. Like it was trying to get that double meaning going in there. So we had logos that were like piles of games and that kind of thing. And she thought, well, light bulb is like to understand. So we tried that with a hexagon, and we sent that over to the graphic artist. And she came back with the little JGG squiggly filament thing in the middle. Like that was totally the artist's idea. And I love that. And it took probably another 2 months or so of refining. Honestly, I had a lot of anxiety about the logo because once you do it, it sticks out there and it's out there. And so anyway, that was probably a longer version of that than you needed. But yeah, we locked in and went with the logo, and I think it's pretty cool. I love the little squiggly filament. And when it comes to John Gets Games, like the name John Gets Games, well, Oh, a long time ago. I can't even give you the numbers, but a long time ago, I came up with a the name John Gets Bored as a YouTube. I'm not sorry, as an internet handle, like for various websites and whatnot. And I created a John Gets Bored YouTube channel. I mean, that must have been like 2009, 2010, something like that. Back then, I was in my late 20s, and I was searching for a hobby. Like I genuinely was. I was like, my life is good. I have a job I like, and I was trying to find something to do. So I went traveling to New Zealand for 5 months, and I came back and I decided I want to kiteboard. You know, with like it's like a wakeboard, but then you get this big kite and you strap it to yourself, and there's 70 feet of line, and so I did that for like a year and a half, and I got a GoPro, and so I took some video of that. Although I don't think I ever put a video of that out. But anyway, the next year I started paragliding, which is just like a big parachute over yourself, jumping off cliffs and flying around for hours. And I took a bunch of GoPro video footage of that and started to just put these up onto John Gets Bored, because the idea was, like I said, I was just bored all the time, and I like had all these faculties, and I was like trying to not be bored. And so when I decided one day on a whim to create a review, it didn't even take me any thought. I was just like, I'll just call it John Gets Games, because like I already had this John Gets Bored thing. And interestingly enough, John Gets Games has completely killed John Gets Bored, because I don't get bored anymore because I have so much to do. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. I'm probably answering these way too long. Hey, there's 29 people here. I haven't been looking down at the screen. Hi, 29 people. Cool. All right, let's see. What is next? Oh, hey, Efka asked a follow up. He said, the light bulb was not because I work in lighting. I think that might have been part of it. I think that was something like that Jessica and I like kind of giggled about. Like, nobody's going to know that I'm actually a event lighting specialist. Um, but that was not supposed to be like a forward facing type of thing. Um, Favorite board game app from C. Campbell. I think that the I would have to say Corkle, because that's the one I've played the most. Um, um, Jessica and I have probably played 20 or 25 two-player asynchronous games of Corkle, because due to my main job of event lighting, I oftentimes find myself bored at work. Like I'm at a wedding, and like they're getting married out there and they're dancing, and I'm only there in case something breaks, and so I'm not doing anything. So Jessica and I would play tons of games of Corkle just back and forth. I think Corkle is a brilliant two-player game, and it's really, really good in the iOS adaptation. Um, yeah, so let's see here. Casey, are you going to be doing a playthrough of the new expansion for Vast? No, that's not going to be happening. Um, Mostly because I got rid of Vast. I never reviewed it. I only played it once with other people, um, and I played obviously once against myself or with myself for the playthrough, and I didn't like it enough. Like I thought it was a fascinating experience to play Vast and to play all these ridiculously asymmetric things, but the rules teach was so awkward and so hard to get through that I just didn't think it was worth it. I decided I'd rather do other stuff. Yeah, so because of that, I don't even have the base game anymore, so I don't see myself doing the expansion. Sorry. Let's see. We're obviously this is the first time we're doing this, and Jessica and I are kind of doing this as a tag team combo right here, trying to make the whole live stream work. So we're yeah, okay, cool. So let's see. The next question comes from Red Eyed Ghost, and they asked, "Have you played Gaia Project much more since your November vlog review coming?" Yes, yes, the review is coming soon. I've played Gaia Project 4 times now, I think, and I don't feel like I'm not quite confident enough to review it yet. But I think maybe one more play. I'd really like to play this one two-player to see what it's like at two-player. Also, just there's so many asymmetric people, different races you can play, that I decided to. I wanted to get it played again, and next weekend I should definitely get it played again, at least once. So hopefully I'm going to get a review of that one coming out in like the next 2 weeks or so. Let's see. Now that you're working on your channel half of the week, what's your typical day like for you? From C. Campbell. Yeah. So for the days when I'm doing John Gets Games, I pretty much wake up, eat cereal because I'm a big fan of cereal for breakfast, while I watch the latest Hearthstone YouTube highlights, because I'm a huge sucker for watching Hearthstone. I never play Hearthstone, but I watch it pretty much every day. And then usually after doing that for about 40 minutes or so, longer than I should, honestly, I start working on whatever it is I need to get done that day. That is sometimes going to be reviewing. Like I just get everything set up and I put the shirt on and I start doing a review, or maybe it's a vlog, or maybe it's just editing. And it's honestly different from a day to day perspective. Now that I've been doing this part time, I'm trying to get ahead. Like I'm finding that near the end of my John Gets Games work week, I am now making content for the beginning of the following week to come out. So I'm trying to get like a week ahead or so that if something happens, pardon me, if something happens, then I'm able to, um, I have a buffer so I can make that work. And then usually around 12 or 1, I take a lunch break, at which point I usually watch live streamed Hearthstone because I don't know, I just really enjoy watching Hearthstone while I eat a sandwich that I make here because I'm trying to keep costs down. And then I edit and film until like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I'm being honest, like there's lots of 5 to 10 minute breaks in the middle of there where the internet pulls me away. Like it's definitely an interesting challenge being my own boss, sitting here by myself. Although I'm actually logging all of my time, like with each project. I found this app called Toggle, like Toggl, that I can log each one of these things to try and keep myself a little bit more on target because this is the job now. So that's important. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much my typical day. Yeah, there's 39 people here now. Cool. We're just about to go on to the next question. Here we go. From Jonathan Dodd. Hey John, have you have you said anything about the topics of your remaining top 10 videos, or are those still secret? I have not said anything yet. I'm going to be rendering my second top 10 video as soon as I finish this variety. This isn't a variety vlog. I'm used to my vlogs being variety vlogs. This Q&A vlog. I can just spoil that one for you now. It's fine. It's going to be top 10 tactical planning games. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when I decided to do 4 different top tens, I I couldn't decide on what they would be, and so I ended up getting about 11 different top 10 categories, and I got every game that I have rated a 6 or above on Board Game Geek, and I put them into a spreadsheet, and then I started tracking every single game on every single one of the different options to try and see which things I could even get to 10 and which things I thought would be an actual interesting list. And honestly, I felt like most of those were boring. Like just not particularly interesting to me. Um, like top 10 two-player games and top 10 um, worker placement games and that kind of thing. It just didn't really grab me. And then I decided, well, I was already trying to figure out the top 10 mechanisms. That was Jessica's idea to do that one, and I thought it was a really good one to do. And I was mulling around this idea that ended up being the random input management idea that I put in, that I talked about as a mechanic I like, where at the beginning of every turn, something random happens, and then you plan after that. And so I was like, oh, I know, I'll make a top 10 of that kind of game because I think those games are really great. And then discussing with Jessica more, I realized that it might be better to broaden that out and be like, okay, well, just top 10 tactical planning games, because that random input management is a very tactical thing, but not every heavy tactical game has random input management. So I decided to do that one. And then the top 10 list after that, I actually talk about this at the end of this one. It should be no surprise that I'm going to do my top 10 strategic planning games. So I figured that was a really good way to break these things up. Also, just because I'm such a Euro gamer that I was originally going to be doing just top 10 dry Euros. And I was like, well, how do you really categorize these with each other? So it was fun being able to like, pull stuff apart and be like heavy tactics, which of course is like short-term planning, and it versus heavy strategy, so long-term planning. So anyway, um, I'm pretty sure I know what my fourth list is going to be, but I'm going to keep that a secret for the moment, just in case I decide to change my mind. All right. All right. C. Campbell, favorite game in which you're encouraged to lie. Okay, so obviously you know my tastes and that I do not lying. I do not like lying. Um, so what that means is I'm now trying to think of any game where you're encouraged to lie that I like. Um, yeah, I mean the only one that's really popping into my head is Liar's Dice, and even though it says liar in the title, you don't really lie in that game because I am totally down with bluffing. Like like bluffing is totally fine with me, but when I just like straight up lie is when it starts to really not work well with my brain. In a game like Liar's Dice, you roll a bunch of dice and then you like secretly look at the dice and then you just bluff. You say, I think there are 6 3s amongst my dice and everybody else's. And maybe I have 0 3s, but that's not a lie. Maybe just because I say I think there's six threes and I have zero does not mean that there might not actually be six threes out there. And so that's why bluffing works well for me. Like I enjoy Texas Hold'em poker. I'm not like a poker shark or anything like that. Like I pretty much prefer to play for very low stakes games, but I enjoy the bluffing in that game as well because you're kind of saying, I think I have the best hand. And you don't know until everybody flips those things over and you're like, I'm going to put money down that I have the best hand. So honestly, like a game that actually says like, you know the truth and now you must lie. The only thing I can think of is Deception Murder in Hong Kong. I haven't played that one since the review came out for it because I don't actually own it. I played a friend's copy enough times to review it and borrowed his copy to do the review. But in that one, I can get around the lying from like a mental perspective because you're almost like talking about a parallel universe truth in that game because in that one you might be the murderer and you have all these murder weapons in front of you and you're trying to figure out who did the murder. And so if somebody says, "Well, I think John did it because of this and this thing in front of him," I could easily be like, "Oh, that's a pretty good point, but what about this person over there?" Like, and then I come up with a completely plausible reason for why this other setup could be for somebody else. And like in an alternate universe, I can just kind of convince myself that that person is actually the murderer instead of myself. And I feel like for other games like The Resistance and Werewolf and Mafia and that kind of stuff, like people develop these constructs of like, well, this person voted this way and that person voted that way, but that gets so confusing and devolving that I feel like oftentimes the success of the lie happens due to obscuring it amongst a bunch of nonsense. And in a game like Deception Murder in Hong Kong, nonsense is not a thing. You're like actually trying to come up with logical ideas. So I guess that would be the best answer to your question. But I mean, just lying in games is super not my wheelhouse. So um, yeah, that answers that one. Ah, wow, there's 45 people here now. This is genuinely about 10 times more people than we were thinking might come. So that's great. Thank you for joining us. All right, Shane. Um, Shane Zuspin, you say, what's the best thing about going full time on YouTube? Well, first of all, I'm going part time right now. I still work 3 to 4 days a week. Well, for the most part, 3 days a week at my old job instead of the 6-ish days a week that I used to do. But anyway, so, what's the best part about going full time? What's the most challenging thing about going full time on YouTube? Okay, so the best part is the amount of time I have it in my evenings now. That's the biggest thing because my regular job that I've been doing for a decade now, it's parties, and so more often than not, most parties you set them up in the morning to the afternoon, and then the party happens, and then the party ends at like 11 o'clock or midnight, and then I either stayed all the way through and now I have to take it down, or I left, like went home, had dinner with Jessica, and then had to leave again, and then go back to the party and then take it down, which means I was oftentimes doing double commutes. Like I live in the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area, and most things that we work are in San Francisco, which means I was driving into and out of San Francisco twice a day. Like that's something I very frequently do. Sometimes in traffic both ways. I mean, last night I left work at 1 in the morning. It was actually not too bad. We started taking everything down at 11, and they were doing bridge maintenance, and so it took me over an hour to get home, even though I left at 1 in the morning trying to leave San Francisco. So like these kind of things are happening less to me now that I am doing this part time, and I think that's a really big benefit to doing this. I think the biggest challenge is just keeping myself on track. Like I said before in the other question, like I am my own boss now. If I'm being totally honest with you guys, I have a lifelong issue with procrastination. Like it's something I've always had a problem with, and so now that I'm my own boss and like my success is going to happen whether or not because I stay focused. Staying focused is the really big thing, and honestly, that desire to be successful is the main thing that kind of reins me in and stops me from procrastinating too much. So I think that should answer your question pretty well, and I think let's move on. Next one is from Christian Orozco, and they ask, can you elaborate your former real job? I understand you install lights. Is that the reason for the logo? Yeah, I can definitely elaborate. Um, as with the logo, it really isn't. I mean, it was kind of like an inside joke for us. Like nobody knows that John does lighting professionally. Like that was not really the idea there, but it kind of worked out well. I do touch a lot of light bulbs. But yeah, my former real job. Well, I did high school theater at Justin Siena High School in Napa, and a very long time ago. And in my senior year, I was part of the Guys and Dolls. We did the musical, The Guys and Dolls, and I was behind the scenes. I did technical theater for the theater in high school, so I was a backstage manager. I was hanging theatrical lights and climbing anything I could get my hands on, and driving scissor lifts up and going 20, 30 feet in the air. I'm a sucker for being up high. I mean, I mentioned before that I did paragliding for a couple years. I love to be in the air. I love to be very high up, and so this just kind of worked well. And I didn't really have any fear about climbing all these crazy scaffoldings and drilling into ceilings and stuff. I just like working with my hands. And this is back when I was 18 in high school, and the one of the technical people who did the lighting for that show, he had just graduated college himself, and I just graduated high school. He was just starting a event lighting company. This is back in 2002, and he said, "Hey, do you want a summer job doing lights?" And I said, "Sure, I like money." So I did probably like 3 or 4 little wedding installs with him as an 18-year-old, and then I went off to college, and that was that. And I did college for 4 years. I ended up getting a degree in economics, which is funny because I've never used that one even remotely. And then I got out of college and I got a full time job as a sales manager for a semiconductor robotics company that my parents actually owned. Very smart parents. And I managed a bunch of sales reps who tried to sell these robots. And I just wasn't liking that job. It was a 8 till 4:30 kind of job every single day, waking up at the crack of dawn. I actually lived in Berkeley at that point, and I was commuting up to Napa, which, as I mentioned before, was an hour-long ordeal. And I just wasn't liking my life. The rigid structure of it all was just killing me. And so one day, after doing that for about a year and a half, it occurred to me, like, that guy I used to do events for back when I was 18. I wonder if he still exists. So I Googled him, and sure enough, he did. So I sent him an email, and I was like, are you still looking for labor? Like, I was just looking for a reason to shake my life up. And anyway, he said yes, and I started working there doing that, and that was in 2007 ish. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but anyway, so it was about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, and that's how I got into the real job. And so the actual thing, you didn't ask me for the story of getting into it, but I tend to ramble when I can't edit things out, so you guys are gonna get offended by that or whatever. But yeah, I set up lights for parties, like little string lights over the area where people are eating. Oftentimes I do, like, we call them washes. You just like put pretty patterns on the floor, and I've installed thousands and thousands of uplights, because when you just shine light up on buildings and plants and all sorts of structures, it usually makes them look about 10 times better than they did before. So that kind of stuff. I mean, I could honestly talk about it for a lot longer, and there's several things that I've done that I can't even talk about because I've done some pretty high level events. But yeah, that's the very long answer to your question. Sorry about that. Next up, we've got from Christian again. What do people at work think of your channel or your hobby in general? They all think it's great that I am doing this. I do not keep this hidden. Like, I tell all my coworkers about this is happening. A couple of them have actually wished me good luck about the pledge drive that I'm doing, because I posted it to my personal Facebook, and I'm Facebook friends with a lot of people I work with. And yeah, no, they are all super into it. I've actually played board games with quite a few of my coworkers. At one point, I did this very high-profile wedding down in Los Angeles. I was down there for a couple weeks, and I dragged one of my coworkers over to, I can't remember the name of there's a board gaming cafe type place where they have a huge library. I can't remember the name of it, but it's down there in Los Angeles, and I went there twice, and I dragged my coworker there once. Yeah, they all think it's really cool, and several of them I found out subsequently have played board games themselves, like in their own ways, like with their own groups of people. The more I talk about the YouTube channel and also just games in general, the more I realize how many people out there that I know already are into this stuff, and I didn't even know. So yeah, that's pretty much where that's it. Although I guess one other thing to say is that because my job is hourly, and it's sometimes I work a bunch and sometimes I don't. A lot of the people I work with are very. We all have our own projects, and so this is my project, and like my coworkers know that John has a YouTube channel and it's really good. They tell me, and I have another coworker who welds, and he welds up crazy artistic structures, and I have another coworker who does like a whole bunch of like technical theater, and like we all have our own things, and we all talk about it a lot when we're driving for hours off to the job site. So anyway, that's that one. Mel Wegman has now asked, how long does it take you to read all the rules of a game to understand it well enough to explain so perfectly? um, well, I usually read rules once. The first, but before I play it the very first time, I always tell myself that I want to read the rules, play the game, and then read the rules again to catch all the mistakes I made. But more often than not, I forget to do that. I enjoy reading rules. I read rules constantly. Like I probably get 5 to 10 emails a week of people asking me to cover their games on YouTube, and I ask them for rules. Like pretty much every single person, I say, "Well, send me the rules, and I'll let you know." And so I am just constantly reading rules, and I enjoy it. I think it's really fun figuring out how the bones of that particular game work. And I think because I enjoy reading rules, that means I'm good at conveying them. I think that's just kind of how that works out. Also, keep in mind, like when I convey rules on film, I have edited out myself teaching the rules very poorly. Like even for, I mean, this is a little example. I'm going to be putting out a review for Smile soon. This is a really tiny game. Like, if I'm sitting down to play it with you at the table, I'll probably get through the whole rules in like a minute. But it took me like 45 minutes to record the rules to this game because I kept botching it and like, no, I'm going to restart it, botching it, and then restarting it over and over and over again. And so that's one of the reasons why it seems like I explained the game well. It's because I cut out all the times I did it poorly. Okay, so next up, wow, 56 people. That's awesome. We've been going for 40 minutes. That is surprising. Cool. So, Eric Silva, do you plan on going to any conventions this year? If so, which ones? Yes, I am definitely planning on going to conventions, hopefully, this year. I really can't commit to any at this point. If I'm being honest with you, the success of this pledge drive is going to help dictate how many conventions I go to this year. I can already tell you that it's very unlikely. It's pretty much a no that I'm going to be going, not going to be going to Gen Con this year. I went last year and it was cool, and I expect to go again at some point in the future. But with everything else going on, it didn't seem to make sense to work that one in. I'm hoping to make it to Essen Spiel again this year, but I really can't promise that. And I'm also hoping to make it to the UK Games Expo, but I can't really lock this stuff into stone for another month or month and a half or so. So yeah, there are several that I'm hoping to do. I will tell you that I've been to Board Game Geek Con 4 years in a row now, and I don't anticipate trying to break that streak. So I do think we're gonna definitely try to go to BGG Con again. So yeah, that should answer your question. Okay, cool. Oh, Martin Anderson says Rising Sun or Battle for Rokugan. All right, so my I've not played either of these games, but I do know that Rising Sun. The idea of this one is it was like started off as kind of a diplomacy kind of game, but you have dudes on a map and you're fighting and you're vying for control and whatnot. Has lots of beautiful miniatures, and I was honestly not interested in the Kickstarter in the slightest because I'm just not in general interested in dudes on a map style games. And then Battle of Rokugan, I had never even heard of until my friend Efka from the No Pun Included YouTube channel, until he got a copy and started telling me that he thought it was really cool. And then he put out a review, which I watched, and long story short, he said, it's really cool. And I do have a friend who owns a copy of it, and I keep turning him down when he asks to play it. I really should say yes. I should give that one a try because that one also has it's kind of like influencing a map in a lot of ways, which in general is not something that I like that much. But I should give it one a shot. So I guess between those two, I'm vastly more interested in Battle for Rokugan. Actually, you can take a look. This is my water bottle is from the company I work for. It also has a light bulb on the front. I work for a company called Got Light. All right. Next up, from Christian again. When did your wife and family realize that your love of board games was more than a once in a while hobby to a passion? Well, I'll actually start with my family for this one. They probably figured it out. I don't know, probably like 2011, when suddenly when they asked me for gifts for Christmas, I would just give them a list of like 10 different board games I wanted, and that kind of happened from year to year as it went on. And with my wife, Jessica, we met almost 5 years ago. We met back in 2013, and I was already crazy down the rabbit hole. I mean, I've been logging every game I've played since 2010, and even at that point when Jess and I met for the first time, I had a collection of 200 board games. So I think she was introduced to me as this board game fanatic, and Jessica's actually she'd been playing games for years before, like in a kind of satellite group with just this tiny single connection of a person, a really good friend of mine named Owen, who actually introduced the two of us. He played board games with them in this kind of completely different group, and so when Jessica and I met, You know, at some point, relatively early on, we found out that we both like board games, and the games that she was familiar with playing were, in general, a little bit lighter, like more party style games. But she also really dug the like thinky strategy games. Actually, to the point now where she likes heavier games than I do. Like on the heaviness scale, like my preferred place is a little bit lighter than where Jessica is. And yeah, so I guess that kind of answers your question. Next up, we have Anne Reynolds. When do we get to meet Jessica? Well, you can kind of meet her already. She's been on screen once. She did the playthrough for Super Motherload with me, and yeah, I guess that kind of answers that question. um, yeah, she's. I mean, if you bump into me at a convention and she's with me there, then you can definitely meet her there. All right, Soulflame. Do you have a game room where you play games, or do you play games in your studio? I only play games by myself in this studio. I Yes, we have a game room. You may or may not know that we recently bought a house back in October of last year. Before that, we lived in a two-bedroom apartment that just had like one living room and a kitchen. And so one wall of our living room was my board game collection, and then in the kitchen we had a big table. That's where we played most of our games. It was in the kitchen. But now that we moved into this house, really great thing about it is it has kind of a living room, and it also had another living room kind of situation. So that second one, we put the board games in, and that's where we tend to eat and then also play all of our games in there. So yeah, we're I feel very fortunate to have that kind of space now. Let's see. And do you have a board game table? I have a table that I play board games on, but no, I don't have a an official board gaming style table. We just have a nice expandable sectional wooden table that we play everything on. If I'm being honest, I've never been too drawn to board gaming tables. Like they look fancy, they look nice. You know, the felts on it. You know, so picking up the cards is easier. They've got cup holders and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I've been doing this. Yeah, I've been like playing games all the time for like 10 years now, and I just don't mind playing on an actual table. Like I don't feel like the benefit for a fancy one really does anything for me. And I have like had catastrophes before. I mean, just a month ago, I knocked over almost a full bottle of beer on my Gloomhaven copy when we were in the middle of a scenario. So that was bad. You know, I just got a bunch of paper towels out, dabbed everything down, and everything's fine. At one point, a long time ago, a whole glass of red wine was spilled on my copy of Stone Age. That might not have been my copy, a copy of Stone Age. I don't remember whose it was, but either way, so you know, kind of catastrophes can happen with food and drinks, and I know that that can happen less when you have like a fancy table. But I, I don't know. I just put my beer on the table and deal with it. We're usually playing my games anyway. Um, let's see, Kevin Weffer. What are your thoughts on throwing out board game boxes and storing games in containers in order to save on shelf space? Well, my thoughts are that's it's a very I was gonna say it's a very personal question. By that I mean it's like personal to each given person. For me, I am not at all interested in that. I mean, part of the allure of a board game collection is being able to see it. You know, I like having that big shelf in the room when I'm playing games. I can look over and easily browse and see what it is. Um, I've had a couple times where I've kind of consolidated games into a container that doesn't maybe match the original one, and I just forget about it. Like I have a copy of the original Cambridge edition with the goofy graphics for Glory to Rome, for instance, and that game was sent in the stupid clamshell plastic thing, which made no sense. And so I ended up putting that whole game in a box for the card game Poison, which came in a box that was about 10 times bigger than it needed to be. And then I proceeded to forget that I owned Glory to Rome because it was in this box that said Poison on the outside. Actually, at one point, I went into Photoshop and made my own little side strip thing and printed it out, taped it to the side of the Poison box. So when I look around, I see that I actually have Glory to Rome over there. But like, that's part of the reason why I don't like putting things in containers. I have a big enough collection now at about 230 or 240 games where I forget I own things anyway, let alone if I hide it into another box. And I'm absolutely going to never play that game because it just never even hits my consciousness. So I think, but for other people like who have smaller living situations where it's a necessity, I mean, it's all about playing board games. Like looking at board games is nice. That's all well and good, but it's all about actually playing them. So like I wouldn't begrudge anyone who wants to actually do this kind of thing. It just for me, it hasn't been something that I felt is necessary. Oh, you also ask about expansion boxes. I throw those away. I see no reason to hold on to expansion boxes. Just cut the sides, flatten them up, put them into the garbage can or recycling. In this case, because they just the very rare case where it just does not all fit in the actual main box. Then I guess I'll keep the expansion on the side. But also, I'm not a huge expansion person. So yeah, that's where I am with that. All right, Stitch. Hey there. How many folks do you play games with? How interested in board gaming is your wife? Um, the rough answer would be my broad gaming group is probably something along the lines of 20-ish people that I play somewhat regularly with. I mean, there's people I play with all the time, and there's some people I play with like once a month or so. And usually when we get together to play games, it's probably 7 to 9 people show up, depending on the how last minute the thing was. I mean, I oftentimes try to do last minute things where I just send out a text message or an email like the day before. I'm just like, hey, does anyone want to play games tomorrow? And in that case, usually it's more like 3 or 4 people show up. And my wife is very interested in playing board games. My wife loves board games. I mentioned a little bit earlier that she actually was really into board games before we even met, and her interest has expanded by being with me because I think anyone who spends any real time with me has their interest in board games get expanded no matter what. Yeah, we play games quite often in gaming group style situations. We rarely play two-player because honestly, there's a lot of great things you can do with your life. I love board gaming, but I don't need to be playing board games every single night. So um, we in general don't play two-player games all that often, but we are frequently playing games like Jessica, myself, and 1 or 2 friends. Playing Euro style games. I mentioned earlier that she is really into heavy style games in general, heavier than me, and we also have several people in my gaming group who enjoy that kind of stuff. So yeah, she's definitely into it, just like me. And honestly, she gives me a lot of feedback when I'm trying to develop reviews for games that she's played. Like I usually bounce some things off of her, and there have been many points that have shown up as review things that have been her idea. But I guess giving credit in those kind of situations just makes things kind of cluttered. All right. Tony Bauza asks, do you get help making decisions in multiple player games? Do you get help making decisions? Um, yeah, I think you probably mean give help. But either way, I'll try to answer this one. Um, yes, it can happen. I'm assuming you're talking about the kind of thing where somebody's kind of mulling things over, or they seem confused or flustered, and you're like, well, it'd be good if you did this, and that's also an option. I mean, I do think I do that at times. I will admit that if like a cooperative game can lend itself towards like alpha gaming where one person kind of takes over, sometimes that kind of happens for me and I have to rein myself back. But in general, I don't think I necessarily play games for other people. And that's usually because I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing on my turn. Because even though I might be a little bit of an alpha gamer, I'm very much an analysis paralysis gamer. That's something I have to fight all the time, and so yeah, usually when I'm playing a game, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing on my turn because I don't want it to be to take too long downtime when it's actually my given turn. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Tony. All right, next question. We've got Donald24433. Do you have a template you follow when reviewing a game, or just more wing it from game to game? I absolutely have a template. I do. This is the only thing I wing. This thing right now, which is why it probably feels a little bit different than some of the other videos I do. No, I absolutely have a template. I have a Google spreadsheet that I have been working with for years at this point, and down the rows is just the different games, and then the columns are the different sections. Like I have a column for my positives, column for neutrals, negatives, variability, player count, all that kind of stuff. I have it all listed out there. So when I work on my reviews, I just load up the spreadsheet, and sometimes I'm working on like 3 reviews at once, and I jump back and forth between them. Like I'm like, I can't think of what's a negative for this game. I'm like, I'll come back to that in a minute. Do something. I'm like, oh wait, that's right, that didn't work. And I pop back up and I just type these things in. And usually each item on the spreadsheet is like 6 to 7 words. Like so, it's essentially an outline for what that review is going to be. And then when I'm recording, I just have my laptop here in front of me and I just read what the next line's going to be. And frequently change things like on the fly. That does happen. But in that case, I kind of edit the thing and shift things around a bit. And even like my variety vlogs, I have another completely different spreadsheet that tracks all of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in the given order. So yeah, I guess playthroughs, I don't have any specific spreadsheets for. Like those, I do wing, I guess. Like I have no pre-plans when I go into one of those, but yeah, definitely a structured experience for me. Next up, we have Man on Fire 117. Hey, John, have you had a chance to play sorry, chance to play the Prodigals Club anymore, and would you still rate it as highly as you did? So I am inferring from this that Man on Fire has watched my top 20 board games as of January 2015. I think is when I made that video. And at that moment when I made that video, I was very high on the Prodigals Club. That is a hard name to say. Um, I think I had it like my number 4 or number 5 game, something very high up. The short answer is I think I played it one more time since then, and I think I would have played it more if I was not a YouTube reviewer, like with a huge amount of new games to kind of churn through all the time. Um, I still have my copy, and I would not mind playing it again because I think it's a really cool game. Um, I don't know. I never actually reviewed that one, but I would, as a very impromptu negative for that game, I will say that it's got it's got a lot of front-loaded complexity as far as learning the game. Like there are these 2 or 3 modules depending on what you play, and the game is absolutely best at 3, but it plays well at 2 modules as well. But each module is like its own mini game, and so the teach of this game is not exactly easy, and so sometimes it just doesn't. Like I see it, I'm like I could play the Prodigals Club right now, but I just don't think I feel like teaching it, and so I move on to the next thing. And I think that's been one of the bigger things that's detracted from it. But I think as a gameplay perspective, it's a really cool game. Like the way all these things work, especially when you're playing with all 3 of the modules, the way you're trying to ditch your money, and it's surprisingly hard to get rid of money because you sell the thing for less than it's worth, but you still get money back, and you've got to get rid of that while you're just constantly doing these card draftings to try and make the combos work. It's a really cool game. I obviously haven't played it in a couple of years. I would not mind playing it again soon. You're not the first person to bring it up recently. Somebody else, I think, commented on that review. Maybe it was you. And asked me if I still liked it so much or if I was ever going to be. Oh, that's right. I never reviewed it. Commented on that video. But either way, yeah, I think I would like to play that one again. I still do think it's a very cool game. I suppose there is a chance I'll play it again soon and realize that it's not the game I remember it being. But right now, I remember it being wonderful. Okay, Zach T is next. He asks, what is your favorite game mechanic? Worker placement, tile laying, pickup, and deliver, etc. Well, Zach, fortunately for you, I just made a top 10 mechanics in board games top 10 list. I just published that last week, and I don't know if I should spoil it for you. Sure, why not? You asked. The number one that I had on that list was, yeah, I believe that was incentivization, which I guess not a lot of people are familiar with as a mechanic. It's definitely not as widely known as tile laying or worker placement. But the idea of an incentivization mechanic is where you have a set of things and they get incentivized until they get taken. So like the simplest one that a lot of people are familiar with is like Puerto Rico, where there are different roles, and when you take a roll, every roll that isn't taken gets a money, and you keep piling this money on top of it until somebody takes it because they don't really care about the roll so much, but they like that big pile of money on top of it. And quite a few games use this. Azul, when you take tiles, they kind of fall into the middle, and the middle gets bigger and bigger until somebody takes the ones they like. Century Spice Road has you placing down spices on the cards you don't want to grab something deeper down. I just think it's a wonderful self-balancing mechanism in games, and I definitely think that it's wonderful, and I like to see that every time it pops up in games. So yeah, that's a little bit of spoiler. Sorry, I got sidetracked there for a second. Yeah, all right. Oh, Blousekey asks, do you still love Gloomhaven? Yes, I do. I mean, I just reviewed it a couple weeks ago, and I think I was pretty glowing in my review of that game. It's wonderful. I've actually played it 4 more scenarios since I put out that review. And if I'm being honest, I've had 2 sessions of Gloomhaven since I put out that review. And if I'm being honest, one of those 2 was the worst session of Gloomhaven I ever had. Without spoiling anything, I bumped into a scenario that was kind of a side quest, and it honestly did not seem like it was balanced very well. It was ludicrously hard. We tried it once, and we didn't even get halfway through it. We were like, okay, let's try it one more time, and we got like maybe 2/3 the way through it before we just failed completely, and we were just like, "This is not fun." Like, that scenario was not fun, not necessarily because it was so hard, but because of the mechanics of it. So, Gloomhaven is not perfect in any way, but, I mean, I can't say the whole thing is perfect, but I can say that when I played it again the next week and we played another couple scenarios, I was right back into just really enjoying it and loving the game. Like, I just think it's so much fun to play it, to see the story evolve and to level up the characters, and just the actual combat, the tactical combat as you're running around the dungeon is strangely satisfying. So yeah, I'm still a big fan, and in the back of my mind, I am hopeful that we'll make it through the whole campaign. Although I don't know how much longer that's going to take. There's still a lot of content in that box. All right, next up we've got Eyal Itzik. Sorry, my brain just fried there for a second. Eyal Itzik. Hi there. Hey John, do you like any Franchise themed games? I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. It's possible. Franchising, well, in particular, the theme of games is not something that is all that important to me. So it's not like the first thing I'm thinking of when I consider a game I'm going to be playing. Um, I'm mentally envisioning my board game shelf right now. Nothing is popping out to me, if I'm being totally honest with you. I guess, actually, you know what? This is live. We can do it. I'm going to look at my board gaming collection real quick. Let's see here. Of course, when you're doing this live on screen, you mess up your password the first time. But let's see here. I'm just going to look at some of the top ones and see if anything pops out to me. I also find that when people ask me, like, oh, do you have a recommendation for a game, this game or that game? I sit there and I'm like, I can't think of a single game right now. Like, my brain definitely can sometimes kind of shut down when it tries to think of like the broad swath of the hundreds and hundreds of games that I've played. Let's see here. All right, looking at the list for my nines. Nope, nope. Yeah, I think my answer, long story short, I can't think of any. Nothing that I've rated particularly highly has popped out. So no, I think this just goes to show that IPs don't really do all that much for me. So let's go ahead and move on from that one. My name is this 192 says, out of games that allowed you to immerse yourself in their themes, which one was the most strategic? Huh. Well, I mean, everyone talks about Gloomhaven all the time, but that one. Do I feel like I get into the theme of that game? I guess to a certain extent. Like the cards can be very thematic, like the words on the cards as you're actually fighting things. But I guess for the most part, I just feel like I'm just mechanically trying to work myself towards the goal in a satisfying manner. Let me see. I mean, I guess I just mentioned that, like, oftentimes when people ask me this kind of thing, my brain can kind of freeze. But let's see here. I guess I could take a look at the list that I pulled up already. Something that really pulls me. Well, okay, you know what? I should look at my list more often because my brain is terrible at remembering things. Pandemic Legacy Season 1 absolutely pulled me into the theme on that one. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a story and it progresses as you go. And I felt quite vested in the theming and the story of everything that was happening in that game. Like, that was definitely an example of really being pulled into the overall theme. I think, honestly, I feel like to a certain degree, when I played Terraforming Mars, the theme, that's a rather strategic game, and the theme of the cards and the different technologies that I was building into these big tableaus, maybe I wasn't like feeling like I was like this magnet of this one thing or that one thing, but I guess in certain games, I'm like, I make so many plants and algae, and like that's what I do as a people on the planet. Like, obviously, I'm mostly just playing the game for the mechanics, but I think that one can definitely pull me in. Spirit Island, that one is a very strategic game. And that one, from a thematic perspective, was definitely very engaging as well. So I think those are a couple examples. I think Spirit Island and Pandemic Legacy Season 1 are both. Also Season 2. I haven't finished Season 2 yet, but that one has also been quite engrossing. So yeah, I hope that one answers that pretty well. All right, next up we have Eric Schwartz. He asks, as a reviewer, you're always playing new games, but is there an older game that you always bring to the table if you get a chance, like a favorite game? Well, there are certainly a couple older games that I think about bringing to the table somewhat frequently. Like Concordia, I think I probably mention being interested in playing that one at least once every month or two. Don't actually get it played that often because more often than not we decide to go with something that's newer. Through the Ages, that's another one that's been around for a while. That gets, I wouldn't say consistently played, but it gets played like about once every year or so, and that's when I really do enjoy going forward. I'm really glad I brought up my list of games here so I can now go back to it and take a look. Um, yeah, it the best answer is I'm thinking about wanting to play these games somewhat often, but because of the channel, it doesn't happen as often as I'd like. You know, like Isle of Skye, I was actually considering like I'd really like to play that one again soon. I was actually telling a coworker about it because she was telling me she was into board games and she really liked Castles of Mad King Ludwig, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to play Isle of Skye. And then I was like, I should really play Isle of Skye again. Man, that game is so good. So yeah, there are definitely some older things. I mean, one that I've played over 100 times over the years is Tichu, and I haven't played that one in a couple of years, but I think that game is absolutely brilliant, and I would not mind playing that one again. So yeah, there are definitely a couple. I wouldn't say any of these are necessarily a favorite game, but there definitely is kind of like a Hall of Fame classics type thing, you know, like a chunk of games that I realistically don't see myself ever removing from the collection because I do want to at least have the option of coming back to them, even if more often than not we end up convincing ourselves to play whatever the newest thing is, unfortunately. Next question, sorry about that, is hi John. If you know both Kepler 3048 and Pulsar 2849, can you give a 10-second comparison from Frabach 72? Um, 10 seconds is not a lot of time. Yes, I can. I can tell you in 10 seconds that they are nothing alike except for they both have a 4-digit number at the end of their name and they're both set in space. The slightly longer version of that is that Kepler is a 3x game where you're sending out ships and colonizing planets and kind of you're doing a lot of resource conversion and you're like doing a lot of terraforming as you're trying to get your points in that way. Whereas Pulsar, thematically, the theme is not strong in Pulsar. You're flying a ship around, like engaging pulsars to get squeeze points out of them. But Pulsar is a dice drafting game that the theme is feels pretty pasted on. Like I would not say there's a strong space theming there. Kepler definitely pulls you into more of the space theme, although I can tell you that Pulsar is a significantly more interesting game from my perspective. But I would not necessarily consider them to be similar in any way, shape, or form beyond theme and the structure of their name. Next up, we've got Matthias Alvarsson. They ask, have you ever considered doing live plays or including other people in your videos? Not that it is needed. Um, well, I mean, the short answer is I've done that once. I've never done a live play. Jessica was in one of the playthroughs I did. She's actually been in a couple of the playthroughs that I've done, but those have been she's been hidden. Like she's been there playing the game with me, but she just tells me what the players do. And I'm like, oh, okay, so then they do this and this. Usually for particular games where you really need to try and obscure some of the information. Like as I'm playing these games, competing against myself, I do. It's surprisingly easy to forget what the plan is of a previous player while I'm on any given player's turn. But for some games, like where maybe bluffing is concerned, that's gonna be very hard to simulate. So yeah, Jessica's been in those. But if I'm being honest, I don't have any real plans to do it. I mean, when you bring in other people, it just the complexity of the situation increases exponentially. You know, right now I have my one camera and I've got my one microphone around my head, and I am in complete control, and I can take as much time as I want to, and I can really think things through and try to play the game in such a way to really tell the story of the game and show all the different mechanics. And if it was live around the table, then first of all the videos would be way longer, and in general I try to cut down on all that kind of stuff so you just see the meat of the game. So you just see the gears clicking together and not necessarily people humming and hawing about what they're going to be doing. And also, I guess John Gets Games is not a personality oriented channel. Like when you think about it, like I feel like I have a decent personality, but I also feel like when you see my videos, you're not usually seeing me in that much of a case. Like I'm very controlled. I'm like, you know, talking about the review or doing the playthrough. Like I've honestly tried to be more myself and a little bit less robotic as I'm doing these videos. But I like to think that people come to John Gets Games for the content itself, and I think that a lot of playthrough providers, like content creators who make like live playthroughs or playthroughs with multiple people around the table, there's more of an emphasis on the personalities of those people and how they're interacting with each other and whatnot. And I'm not disparaging that in the slightest. I'm just saying that's not something that I've necessarily cared to try and do in the past, and I don't really feel like it's the focus of what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I don't really see that happening. Frabach again, Frabach72. Have you ever written a game of your own? Uh, yes. I mean, I'm assuming you mean designed a game. And yeah, I have. I've designed, I've half designed a couple games, and I've essentially completed one. That one, it's called Mutation. You can actually find it on Board Game Geek. It's just called Mutation. I was amazed that nobody had taken that name before. It's a bit generic, but it is a dice rolling game that has it's a dice rolling and stacking game where you just have a big pile of dice and you roll two dice every turn, and then you choose one of those two dice. They're all d6s, and then you take the die and you put it out into the middle of the table into this growing three-dimensional blob of dice, and it kind of felt to me like they were bacteria in a petri dish, like eating each other and growing and expanding and cutting each other in half and whatnot. And I designed that mostly back in like 2011, 2012, something like that. Back when I thought I wanted to be a board game designer, like that was an aspiration of mine before the YouTube channel. And realizing how difficult it was and how I did not have the mental ethic. Not that's not what I'm looking for. I didn't have the ability to stay focused enough to iterate it as often as I needed to actually design games well. And I realized that I should probably not be an actual board game designer. But with Mutation, it's just a pile of dice. And I actually kept my, like right from the very beginning of that design, I was like, I'm going to design a game that just needs a pile of D6s. So I'm going to not allow myself to start bringing in cards or special tokens or anything like that. And it's very satisfying to have a restricted design space like that. And I'm actually pretty proud of the game. It's there's something wrong with the end game condition. Like if I'm being honest, like I feel like the game is done, except I don't love how that game ends at this point. But either way, I do think that one's pretty cool. There was another game I worked on for a long time. I called it Nanogrid, where once again I had dice, but dice were used as counters, and it was a tile laying game with a bunch of they were hexagonal tiles, and as things grew out, you were kind of like expanding on the grid and building nodes and kind of taking control of it. And obviously, I don't like that kind of game that much anymore. But back in like 2012, I did, and so yeah, I've definitely dabbled enough to know that board game design is not something that's really for me, but I'm happy to have a game that I made. Yeah. Just so everybody knows, I think we've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes now. I think probably going to go for about another 15 minutes, and then I'm probably going to wrap this up. I don't want this to be too crazy long, and my voice is honestly starting to go a little sore. So anyway, let's go back over. Connor Weissmendel asks, how do you choose which games to demonstrate? So I'm assuming you mean like which games get actually shown on the channel. And well, when it comes to reviews, I pretty much choose the games that I feel like I've played enough times to actually review them. And sometimes I make a priority of trying to play certain games enough times to get a review out because maybe they're particularly hyped right now and people really want to know what my opinion is of that game. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, I guess I've played that game 4 times now. And yeah, I feel like I've got a lot to say about that. And so I'll put that review up. And more often than not, when I do those kind of reviews, they get nowhere near the amount of views because they're usually older stuff games, but that's fine. When it comes to the playthroughs, I try to pick games that I think will be interesting to watch. When it comes to the non-sponsored content, also with the sponsored content, like you may or may not know that that some publishers pay me to do full game playthroughs, and I say no to a lot of those requests because I feel like the game doesn't really match up with the vibe of the kind of stuff, the kind of content I want on my channel, or I just don't think the game is particularly interesting. So I do try to pick out games that, even from that kind of like marketing interaction perspective for the sponsored content, will be interesting to see. But when I'm not talking about the sponsored stuff, I just kind of look at my collection when I want to make another playthrough. I'm like, oh yeah, I think people might like that. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they really don't care, and I'm surprised. I remember last year I thought that the Plague Inc. board game was kind of cool. It had some problems, but I thought it was kind of cool. And I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and do a playthrough of that one, and I did. And like nobody watched it. That's not true. Quite a few people watched it, but like compared to all the other things, it was like, well, I didn't spend like 15 hours on that. Oh well, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, that's how I pick that stuff. Next up, we've got Zilch Fiesta. They ask, how are you? How are your gaming? What are your gaming pet peeves? I'm sorry, my brain is starting to go a little loopy as well. What are your gaming pet peeves, either with games or with other gamers? Huh? What are my gaming pet peeves? Well, I know I'm not crazy about people doing like alpha player. Like I mentioned that sometimes people do, sometimes I do that when I'm playing games, but I certainly don't like it when people kind of take control. I guess maybe my biggest pet peeve would be when I'm playing a game with somebody who is not wanting to like participate in the fun atmosphere of the game. Like if you've ever played a game with somebody who's just not having fun and they have kind of decided that nobody else is going to have fun because they're not having fun, and through like the tone of their voice or the utterances they say and all that kind of thing. And so that's probably a pet peeve that sticks out to me. I guess another pet peeve is when I play a game with sleeved cards. Like I guess that's an actual pet peeve because some people have a huge pet peeve to not sleeve their cards, but I hate sleeves in games. Yeah, this will be my pet peeve. Yeah, I really hate it when I have sleeve games because the cards are so slippery. And so, oftentimes you'll play a game. My games are never sleeved, but when I play somebody else's game or maybe a game at like a board game cafe, you'll shuffle up the deck and you have this deck this big and you go to draw a card and the thing falls apart because these things are so slippery next to each other. I figure games are meant to be played. Cards will become worn down over time. And I've never played a game so much, even games I've played like 20 or 30 times, that I could not actually continue to play. Actually, you know what? Right now, because of a top 10, I have my Tichu deck in front of me. This deck has probably been played 30, 40, 50, 60 times, something like that. And I've never sleeved these cards. And these cards are pretty gunky. Like I was going to take photos of them and I was like, wow, the edges are really brown. But at the same time, it's fully playable. Like this game is no worse than it was the very first time I took the shrink off of this copy because you can see all the numbers and you see all the things and like it doesn't hurt my overall impression and enjoyment of the game just because the cards are a little bit dirty. Honestly, I see the dirty cards and I'm like, yeah, this game is cool. Like this is a well-loved game. It's almost like a mark of distinction when I pull a board game off the shelf and I see the edges are all super scuffed in because it means that it's ridden in my board gaming bag a bunch of times. And that means it's been to tons of different board game meetups throughout the years. And yeah, that's my pet peeve. I really don't like sleeves or when people go fanatical crazy about trying to protect their games because at the end of the day, it's just piles of colorful paper. Right, we've got about 10 more minutes, and it looks like we're going to be trying to get to as many questions as we can, but some of them honestly might get skipped as we're getting down here near the end. But yeah, okay, so next up we've got Brian Brazil, and they ask, have you ever been starstruck when meeting a celebrity in the board gaming community? Um, yeah, yeah, the answer would be yes, once. And it was such a strange feeling that I've kind of really focused myself on not doing that again when I've met other people. And that would have been Board Game Geek Con in 2015, I think it was, when I met Tom Bassel for the first time. Not necessarily because I like the Dice Tower. Like I've watched hundreds of their videos, probably like a lot of other people. But I would not necessarily say I'm a fanboy of their channel or any of that kind of stuff. But they're a very high profile type situation. And Tom actually emailed me and asked me to meet him at Board Game Geek Con so that we could chat about something. And I was freaking out about it. Like honestly, I was super nervous. And like I'd see him across the room and I'd be like, oh, I'll talk to him later. Oh, he's in a game. And it was like it's the Saturday of the convention. The convention was almost over, and I was like, he told me to do this. I have to go do this. And so I went up and I kind of interrupted him while he was playing a game, and my heart was like pumping in my chest, and I don't think it was because it was like I said, I was not like a huge fan necessarily, but like it's really a human thing to build people up in your mind, like when you see them on the internet or you see how maybe influential they are in all these different ways. And I remember being like kind of upset with myself about how I did that. I was like, he's he's just a guy, and I think he would probably agree. Like if he saw this, he'd be like, yeah, I mean, we're just two people who like board games who are talking. Like it's ridiculous that I had that kind of feeling, and I was able to kind of figure that out and squelch that down and be like, you know what, we're all just gamers, we're all just people. And so like when I met Rodney Smith, who's a really great guy, I did not have that moment because I had already kind of had the learning experience of getting over that. And yeah, so I guess that kind of answers your question. Like it's definitely a strange thing meeting people who you feel like you know, who you don't actually know. And yeah, it happens to all of us. Okay, next up we've got Chris Eastwood. Oh my goodness. See, this is why I edit my videos. I say things like this all the time. You would not believe the kind of weird mumblings I do, and then I cut those things out. All right, so Chris says, How often do you avoid playing games solely because you don't feel like teaching it? Ah, okay, right. So based off of like the Prodigals Club that I mentioned earlier, this is it's hard to answer this from a like numerical perspective, but I would say that probably on almost every board game night there is a moment where somebody says, "I really like to play X game, whatever it is," and I'm like, "Ah, yeah, I wouldn't mind it either, but I just don't have it in me to teach it right now." And usually that's when you're kind of later on into the game night, and that statement is kind of wrapped up in maybe I don't really want to play a game that heavy as well, because kind of by definition, if you don't really want to play a game because of the complex teach, the game itself is probably going to be kind of heavy as well. I don't think the Prodigals Club is particularly heavy. I think it just happens to be a complicated game to, pardon me, to explain. But I do think that it's a somewhat common thing. Like it can keep some pretty cool complicated games on the shelf, unfortunately. Looks like I might be getting some blur from the webcam that I'm using. It has a really sensitive autofocus, so gonna come in and out sometimes, I think. All right. Man of Fire asks, what game have you played the most and why? All right. Let's go back to the internet. Let's see. Going back to this list, sort by my plays. Okay, so I started logging my plays back in 2010, like January 1st, 2010. So that is, I guess, a lot of years of plays. And my most played game is Crokinole at 79 recorded plays. Although I already owned the board for a long time before this. So I've played Crokinole a lot more than this. And wow, Tichu is at 78 logged plays since 2010. And I know I played that one at least 20 or 30 times more. So it's probably a tie between these two because the third most played game is Hive at 37 plays. So that's a big gap. So anyway, Crokinole, if you're not familiar with it, is a flicking game. You have a big circular board in the middle of a table, and it's usually partner based. You and your partners across. Wait, no, is your partner across the table from you? Oh my gosh, my brain is falling out of my ears now. Yeah, I think it is. Either way, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of it, but you are flicking little discs and you're trying to knock your opponent's pieces out and leave them on the board in the right positions. And a usual game of Crokinole lasts like 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how good you all are. Because actually, both of these games could technically play forever. Um, because in Tichu, you just play until one team gets 1,000 points. Oh, that's interesting. They're both team-based games. Huh, hadn't occurred to me. Apparently, I like team-based games. Should have kept that one in mind when I talked about my favorite mechanics in board games. But in both of these games, you just score a little bit of points each round, and in Tichu, you can actually lose points. So I've seen a game of Tichu last 30 minutes, and I've seen a game of Tichu last 2.5 hours because it's just a slog as people don't get up to that threshold. And Coconut is the same way. I guess if there's only one difference between the two in my log plays, they are effectively tied when it comes to that. Next up, we've got Augusto Cruz. They ask, how do you deal with... actually, before I do this, because we're almost at the end, I'm just going to one more time. If you want to sign up for the giveaway, go ahead and send an email over to jggcontest@gmail.com because I'll be revealing the winner of that one pretty darn soon. All right, so Augusto asks, how do you deal with the can I take that back in your group? Ooh, this is a really good question. So the idea here is you're playing a game and you do your turn, and then it's the next person's turn, and maybe they've done something, maybe they haven't, and you're like, ooh, actually, hold on. Can I, would you mind if I did this instead of that? And we do this all the time in my group, if I'm being honest with you, and I have no problem with it. From my perspective, I play games to have fun, and I want to win. Like, if it's a competitive game, every time I sit down to play a competitive game, my idea is that I want to win. But I don't want to win so much that it excludes out fun for everybody else. And so I'd say in most, especially Euro style games that we play, everyone around the table usually gets about one gimme or like one kind of take back type of thing. But there is a limit to that. And I think we all kind of contextually have felt that out over time. There have been times where I'm like, oh gosh, oh, I really should have done this instead of that. But you've taken your turn and you drew those cards, so I'm not going to do it. It kind of depends on how much new information has happened. If the next person has not done anything on their turn, then 99% of the time, we as a group are like, yeah, sure, just redo it. And then we just move on, and that's totally fine. Like, we certainly don't play with like chess rules. And occasionally, if like even another person's turn has happened, but the blunder that somebody made was so bad, like devastatingly bad, and everyone around the table agrees, like, yeah, you obviously did not intend to do that, then we all agree to just change it. Like, we all want to have fun, and win against our best selves. And so I really don't have a problem with this. But then again, that's kind of the group I play with. Like I played with these people for years and years and years. And if I played with somebody who like every single turn was doing this and they were trying to argue that they wanted to do it, even though maybe like you've dealt out new cards and new information is out there, then this would definitely start to bug me. So I feel like it's going to be a case by case type of situation, but we do it all the time. We're coming close to the end here. All right. So Augusti Pellissier asks, "What games are you looking forward to this year?" Hmm. If I'm being totally honest with you, I have not been following all that many like great anticipation type threads that have been coming out. So I'm kind of having a hard time thinking. You know what? I'm going to go back to Board Game Geek, and this time I can go to my subscriptions because every time I hear about a new game that's coming out, I subscribe to it on the channel. I mean, on my thing. Let's see, items by subscription. So if I look at my subscriptions, then I'll be able to remember everything that I knew is coming out. I know that one that I'm quite interested in is Race to the Newfound Land. That one is, let's see here. Sorry. Yeah. That one is, I don't remember who the designers are, but I've seen a couple of photos of it. It's just a big youre looking board with tracks on it and colors all over the place and numbers and symbols. And I just, you know, when you just like see a game and you're like, I know nothing about how that plays, but I think that's going to be my jam. I saw that one and I was like, I think that's probably going to be my jam. Let's see here. So, I'm, of course, the internet is going to be slow when I am trying to do this stuff live. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So, Coimbra, or I think that's not how you actually pronounce it, is another dice drafting game that's coming out from, I think, Plan B or one of their fragmented companies. I don't remember all of the super specifics on it, but it looked like it had beautiful artwork, and I love dice drafting games, so I'm definitely very curious to see how that one goes. Let's see here. Another one is um, actually that's kind of it. I guess Teotihuacan, City of the Gods. That one is supposedly the sequel to Zolkin with the Mayan calendar with all the gears that moved on the board. I really liked a lot about Zolkin. I thought it had some brilliant ideas, so I'm curious to see what that designer does next. But looking at my list, I've really not subscribed to that many new things. I mean, there's a couple new Feld games coming out, Forum Trajan and Carpe Diem. I'm curious to see what those are about because in general I like Feld games, but I think that's pretty much the answer to your question. So I think we've got one more question to cover, and then we'll do the random drawing. All right, we've got Lead Magnet. They ask, do you feel any responsibility for being a market shaper? Um, huh. No, I guess would be the honest question, an honest answer to that. Uh, I mean, I've never had anybody accuse a video of mine of like causing a game to sell out or anything like that. I guess maybe at some point, if I keep doing this for years and years, and suddenly like instead of having 16,000 subscribers, I have 70,000 subscribers or something like that, then that could be the case. I guess as time goes on, as the kind of internet influence grows, my opinion and the videos I put out will have more of an effect. So I guess I should have a responsibility to it, even though it's not something that ever really occurred to me. I think at some point something will probably happen that will kind of like knock this into my head and be like, oh wow, that actually happened. I mean, I guess when I did my Great Western Trail review last year, there was a good amount of backlash to it. Like I don't think it didn't hurt the game or anything like that, but like that was a moment when I realized kind of how many people were really paying attention and how like my opinion can interact with other people's opinions. So I guess that's not really the answer. That's not really the question you asked, but I guess my responsibility is being a market shaper. I guess to a certain degree, I hope that my being very critical of every game I review is going to help make better board games come out. I mean, that's like kind of a lofty, um, kind of silly thing to say, I suppose. But when I review games, I really try to find something negative about every game I do. Like if I don't have a negative, then I really couldn't come up with something, because I don't think I've ever played a perfect game. Like even if it doesn't have a negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that the game is going to be perfect. So yeah, I think over time I'm hoping that shining a very detailed light on all these games is just going to maybe motivate people to do one more round of playtesting or one more blind testing of a rulebook or that kind of thing. So. Alrighty. that is going to wrap that up for now. I just want to thank everybody for coming. There's 77 people here. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, I wish I could go on for another hour and a half, but my voice really is starting to get genuinely sore. And I think that it's probably time for us to go ahead and do the giveaway. So when I look over here, um, there are, sorry, what was that? There are, looks like 62 different emails got sent in. There's been 73 emails that have come in. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and I wish I had this set up so I could just like show you this happening on screen. You're gonna have to trust me. But I have a random number generator on my phone right here. I know you probably can't read this one right now. 74 apparently. So we're gonna do this right now. Type in 74. So a number between 1 and 74. I'm gonna generate that and 16. That's gonna make my life very easy. We will look at the 16th email that came in. Um, let's see. I'll let you know who that's going to be in just a moment once we have figured that one out. And then I'm going to send all this stuff out. Just want to thank everybody again for coming. I really haven't, I probably should have talked about the Patreon pledge drive a little bit more, but a big part of doing this live Q&A was to try and just generate a bit of extra awareness of the pledge drive that I'm doing and the fact that I am doing this as a part-time type of thing, like trying to do this professionally. And I guess if I look over here, I can say that a couple new pledges came in over the course of this pledge drive. Looks like about $15 in new pledges a month. So I very much appreciate that. Do we have the winner? Okay, it sounds like it is Marcel is the winner. That's the official ruling. I don't know how to. Marcel Poeda. You are Poeda? Apologize for the brutalizing of your name. You're going to be the winner of this stack of really cool games. So I will respond to your email and get your mailing address, and I really hope you enjoy these. I have not actually played Isle of Trains yet, but Exoplanets was pretty neat. I did a playthrough for that one, and Spirit Island is phenomenal, and I'm hoping to do a review for that one soon. All right, so I think with that, I should wrap this thing up. I'm not really sure how to do this live, so I guess I'll just say thank you to everybody for stopping by. This is by far and away significantly more people than I expected to come, and I had a really good time. Maybe this is something we can get to more in the future. I have as one of the goals for the Patreon campaign, I have doing a monthly question and answer thing just like this, and I think this has gone relatively well as a first draft. If you're interested in that and you're interested in supporting the channel in general, please consider supporting the pledge drive that's happening right now. And with your support and a bunch of other people, hopefully we can get to that point and we can do this a little bit more often. So thanks for watching, and I'll see, I guess, some of you guys around at maybe conventions or maybe just in comments on YouTube. And yeah, that's it. Goodbye.